There's been a pretty bad teacher shortage. A lot of teachers leaving the profession. Seems like it's getting worse over the last, especially the last decade. So we're going to talk about that tonight.
What is the cult that pretends it's not a cult?
Teaching, this is almost too easy. You're not really allowed to question anything, and if you do, it's always met with, well, aren't you doing this for the kids? You're forgetting the reasons why you're in this in the first place. There's the guilting and shaming about you never doing enough. You can always be doing more. There's the isolation, which obviously you are surrounded by people all day, but if you've ever been in a classroom, you understand how isolating that can be. And you've got the loyalty you're expected to show to, your school district principal, and they're telling you things like you were called to be a teacher, with a healthy dose of gaslighting, and they're telling you how much you love your summers off and retirement, and that you're not really qualified to do anything else. And a lot of times they'll have you do these little mind-numbing techniques where you have to write down what your why is. And you're dictated so much in how you're expected to act and behave and talk and speak in public, on social media, and everywhere. And if you do even the slightest thing, they're like, well, you could get fired for that. And meanwhile, you're out here barely making, $50,000 a year or whatever it might be. Because you have so many of these stipulations and feelings wrapped up in your job, it almost becomes an us versus them mentality where it's like, teaching versus the other profession. At the end of the day, you just feel completely drained because what you've done is never good enough. You feel constant guilt and you're not allowed to question anything. And if you look these up, so many of these are definitions of a cult.
I'm going to agree with them mostly there, but I was a substitute teacher for a couple of years. My wife was a full-time K through 12 teacher, and I would say that the one difference between a cult and teaching is that the teachers aren't really sleeping together. Unfortunately, you get everything that's bad and none of the good.
You're joking about that, right?
Speaking of none of the good, here is the pay by state of each teacher, even in like the higher end states. I mean, I guess Massachusetts, you get $76,000. That's cool. 56,000, 54,000 in Utah, Nevada 55,000, California 77,000. But really, that's probably lower pay because the cost of living expenses are higher. It's probably even better to be living in Colorado. These are people with a lot of times bachelor's and master's degree. Pretty much every time bachelor's degree, but a lot of them have master's degrees. Real quick, if you haven't already liked the video, please go ahead and give it a like. I really appreciate it, and subscribe to the channel, and let's keep going.
Why they're quitting is because these kids are mean and they're making the class.
I was ready to be paid absolutely nothing. I was ready to have to figure out how to teach to a test and also to teach to my students' needs. I was ready for parents to be either accusatory, unreliable, or outright hostile. I was ready for kids to not like school and to act out in normal kid ways, and I was prepared with fidgets and natural consequences and building relationships. But the system was not prepared for the volume and the scale of behaviors that they are seeing right now. At my school, we had 1, 2, 3 levels of intervention, and every single kid, if you followed the chart, would hit the top of the intervention plan. And those interventions are so time consuming that they're not designed to be done on every single kid in a grade. And in my school, we had grades where 70-80% of the kids should have been in intensive counseling. They were sometimes active dangers to themselves and others, and you couldn't get them removed until something had happened and it was already too late. And there's 1,000,001 answers.
I wish you would tell us where this was, because there are different, I've been to different schools, I've tried different schools, like I said, I was a sub for a while, and there are schools just within like the same city where they are night and day as far as behavioral issues. You go to a certain school and it's like they're just going through new teachers, having to get new teachers every single year because the kids are so horrible at that school. And then you'd go like 3 miles even, there'd be another school and the kids are night and day. They're completely well behaved. The parents are all great. And so I'm actually really curious what kind of school she was at, if she was at one of
Answers
that
to
ones.
why the kids are acting like this. But the parent reason, the one behind all of them, is both very easy and very hard to wrap our heads around. Do you remember in the beginning of the pandemic?
She makes a really good point here about the pandemic, so you'll want to pay attention.
That feeling that you had when you still had to do everyday things like go to work or go to the grocery store when the whole world was falling apart around you. Do you remember how it felt like a betrayal of your humanity in a lot of ways to go about your daily life when there were people who were suffering as much as they were. Do you think about that now? How often do you think about that? How profound of a long-term effect did it have on you? Now imagine you're 9 and your grandma in the nursing home is locked up tight and you can't go see her every Sunday like you used to. You can't go to school. You can't see your friends. You can't leave your house, but you still have to turn on your computer and do your math homework every single day. When you, a grown-up, were a kid, why did you do your work? It's because you had to, right? That was just the reality. You did it. You just did it. But that stopped.
So imagine you're 6 years old when this is going on. So you're like first grade, and then the pandemic happens. And then you spend 2 years pretty much out of school, especially when when you're at the age of 5 and 6, when you're like coming online and you start forming memories much better that you'll carry on into your adulthood. That's like your reality. Like the 2 and the 3 and the 4-year-olds, I don't think they're going to be kind of damaged really that much because they're so young. They're not going to remember it. But the formation years of 5, 6, 7, man, that probably messed them up pretty hard.
Stopped being the reality for a lot of these kids for quite a long time. And then when we popped them right back in school and said, okay, now everything's good and we're going to move on, they can't deal. We can do that, but they can't. And so they're losing it because the world is losing it. Kids can't deal with cognitive dissonance like adults can. And this is how it's showing. I don't know what the answer to it is, but this is where it's coming from.
I just had to double check. I think she might have used cognitive dissonance wrong. It's the discomfort a person feels when their behavior does not align with their core values or beliefs. Cognitive dissonance is a psychological phenomenon that occurs when a person holds 2 contradictory beliefs at the same time. Maybe I'm missing something. While burnout is a common phenomenon in all professions, teachers tend to see higher levels of burnout. In fact, a survey by RAND shows that teachers are more than twice as likely to be stressed as other adults. And according to a study from the American Educational Research Association, teachers in the U.S. are 40% more likely to experience symptoms of anxiety in comparison with healthcare workers. That's surprising. 20% more likely than office workers, and 30% more likely than workers in other professions like farming and military. I'd be curious to see what the breakdown is, or what the highest, like where they chart out on, like, let's say the top 10 professions that have the most symptoms of anxiety. That'd be kind of an interesting stat. Some of the warning signs of teacher burnout, I'm sure this includes pretty much everybody, just burnout in general: change in appetite, weight gain, anxiety or depression, fatigue, sleep disorders, irregular hair loss, lack of job satisfaction, inability to enjoy downtime. Yeah, I'd say that's burnout for everyone in general.
As a teacher of 24 years, this being my last year, I'm retiring. I'm done. And I'm done because of one word: parents. And I am going to speak for teachers who can't speak because they're still in the profession. Education has changed so much that it is unbearable. And that's why there's a teacher shortage. I have seen education change in 24 years, and it hasn't changed for the better. And a lot of it has to do with parenting or lack thereof. Parents, when you send your child to school, they need pens, they need pencils. If they don't have them, please ask me or ask the school. Parents, when you send your children to school, yes, they do need their books. Yes, they do need a notebook. If they do not have any of those things, please ask your teacher or please ask the school. Bottom line is this: teachers are not just teachers. The amount of time that I spend teaching is
20%, 30.
Let's see. If I'm lucky, maybe 20 minutes within a class period.
Yeah.
There's so much other stuff going on every minute, every second of the class period. It starts off as soon as the kids come in the room. There's always self-regulation that I have to do. There's always redirections that I have to do. There's always repeating the same information, even though it's written on the overhead, even though it's clearly spelled as clear as it can be in the written language. Step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. And even after I ask for clarifying questions, which I don't get any, there are kids who are constantly coming in late, which disrupts the classroom. The phone is ringing because a child needs to go to see the counselor because they are dealing with whatever issues. I get that, and I understand it happens. There are interruption because a child is leaving.
I really think, and there's some schools that are trying this out, but we should just ban cell phones completely. How did we survive the 1990s? As a kid growing up, I didn't get a cell phone until I was in high school, and I had a flip phone at that point. But how in the hell did society manage in the 90s and 80s and 70s with the kids not having a phone? If there was an emergency, if a parent needed to contact their kid and get the kid out of the class, they'd have the speaker, they would call the office would call in on the little speaker up on the wall, and they would say, hey, you need to send Jake Day down to the front office. His parent is picking him up. Nowadays, all the kids have cell phones in their pockets or in their bags, and even if they're meant to have them turned off, they never really do. They got the phones under their desks. The teachers aren't dumb. They see it. A lot of them just let it go by as long as it's not being disruptive and they're like, playing music or playing a video loud and they're showing something to somebody else. They'll just let it slide. 90% of them will just let it slide. But really, is the student learning at this point, and the student believes that they're just getting away? Because a lot of times the teachers just don't want to cause a scene, and they don't want to have to keep getting after this one particular or two or three particular students because they're trying to teach the other students that are there to learn. The few of them that are there, they're trying to be good teachers for them. But if they're constantly getting after all these other students because they got phones, then they're not going to have time to do that. So really, it's just like almost a satiating thing. It's like the parent that just gives their child an iPad because they don't want to have to deal with the child. Speaking of child, there's my child right there. What's up, cat?
Daddy?
Yeah.
Because the parents are taking the child out of school to go somewhere. There are interruptions in the day because I have to fill out an independent contract for a child who's going away for a month to Italy or to India. So that means I have to make special lesson plans for that child, which they don't do, by the way. There are interruptions when you have the counselors coming into the classroom and asking to take out a certain student. There are interruptions in the classroom because there are so many students with special needs, and again, I am not faulting them for that. All I'm telling you is that a lot of extra energy goes into students who have special needs. And I'm the only person in the room. There isn't a teacher's aide. There isn't another special ed person in here with me. And I have 33 to 34 students. The interruptions are insurmountable. So trying to teach is virtually impossible. We as teachers have become babysitters. And all 100%. We do is we're putting out fires.
It's been like that for at least a decade, maybe more.
3 minutes. And that's not an over-exaggeration. That is the truth. So, that and many other reasons, I'm retiring after 24 years. I have had it.
I mean, it's just tragic, too, because if her glasses were a little bit smaller, they would look so much better. I would maybe change the color, too, do like maybe a lighter. Sorry, we're getting distracted here. Over 3/4 of states are still facing shortages. No statewide data. Interesting that Oregon is not reporting that. Teacher shortages in pretty much every single state, except for New Mexico and Florida. That's good to hear.
I quit education 2 years ago. I was a teacher for 8 years. I have a master's degree in education. Ultimately, the reasons that I left was because I realized how bad it was getting and that absolutely nobody was doing anything to make it better. I looked around and I said, I am 29 years old. I cannot do this until I retire.
All right, you need to be careful with these reflections in the glasses because Rainbow could find your exact location with just those trees in the background.
Like absolutely nobody is coming. And the issues that we were experiencing were ones that had been steadily increasing since I became a teacher. And that's why, like, if you ask a teacher who's been in the classroom for 15, 20 years, those are, the veteran teachers, what was it like when you started and what is it like now? They'll say it was a different world. This is not what we signed up for. This is not what people thought they were getting into. Lack of support from parents, lack of support from admin, student behavior, the implications of testing and that being tied to your job, the students' performance.
If you look at the complaints of even parents and the complaints of teachers and staff online, it's always the parents and the administration. I am supportive of the teachers with the students at my school, and whatever, when my son gets in trouble at school or my daughter gets in trouble at school, I believe them. And I give them enough rope to discipline the kids if they need to. I'm not sitting here worried about, oh, well, what did you say to him? Or did you make him feel bad? Like, when my son gets upset, I ask him first, well, what did you do? Why is it that you got in trouble? It's like we now live in a society where everyone just believes what their kid is telling them, even though we know for a fact that kids lie all the time. How do we know? Because we were kids once. They exaggerate. They don't tell quite the truth. Are there certain cases where teachers get out of hand? Yes, but it's so rare. It really is 1% of the time. 99% of the time, teachers are trying to help your student. They're trying to discipline your student. They're trying to get them to do the right thing. And what's crazy is, like, kids will misbehave at home. The parent will be struggling with dealing with the misbehaving kid. And then when the kid goes and misbehaves at school, somehow the parent has a disconnect and thinks it's the teacher's fault. It's wild. It's absolutely crazy. It's like whatever behavioral issues you're having at home, they're almost always worse at school.
Performance tied to your job performance. I don't want to go into my forever sleep because people brought things to schools and local areas could do nothing about it. Pay is horrendous. I was making $47,000 as a teacher with a master's degree and 8 years of experience. Schools are deeply under-resourced and the public is actively trying to defund public education.
So Apocalypse Later asks a pretty good question, says, is this problem worldwide or is it just in the US? Jennifer JP says, I have taught in 5 different countries and it's definitely everywhere. The US is the worst, but expect to see a rise in other countries too. Like I said earlier, it's really pockets. It really is per school. Now, there's more schools where it's getting worse, but there still are good schools. There still are good areas and neighborhoods, and it's finding those. Like, I would say, better to have lower pay at a better school with better students than slightly higher pay with worse students. It'll just make your life miserable. And again, I've taught at dozens and dozens, maybe 50 different schools, 40 to 50 different schools. It's wildly different depending on the school you're at. Colin Red says, happens in Singapore too. My observation is that children showing delinquent behavior have parents that behave like assholes. Nurturing, setting boundaries, and enforcing boundaries are practically non-existent. Parents are self-obsessed, and when the kids behave badly, all they did was to shout at them and immediately resume their activities on the phone. A little lighter one for you, and we'll finish off with this one.
I've got bad news. Today is the day that I quit teaching. Please, let me explain why. Yesterday, our class was working on a project, and I told everyone to go to the PowerPoint. Finally, when they got to the PowerPoint, I did this. PowerPoint, PowerPoint, PowerPoint. I waited a second for their reactions, and finally, after just like 5 seconds of awkward silence and me expecting like a laugh or like, hey, I got this. Why are you being so weird? They didn't know where that was from. It's from The Office. That's Michael Scott. Like, that's his thing. That's one of his many things, but that's a very popular quote. But the reactions I got next are disheartening, so viewer discretion is advised. They said, people watch that old show? What did you say? How dare they? Seriously, the minute that The Office becomes old, I become the teacher that this school needs, not what it deserves.
All right, let us know your thoughts. If you're a teacher and you just want to vent down below in the comments, go ahead and do that. Let me know what you think. If you're thinking about going into teaching, if you're thinking about quitting teaching, the issues that you're having with students, with parents. My name's Jake. If you haven't already liked the video, please go ahead and give it a like. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, why don't you go ahead and subscribe to the channel, and I will see you guys in the next one. Peace out.